Welcome back to Hanging with History. This is Season 1, That Miracle That Happened, That One Time. And this is Episode 8, Forkbeard the Great, First Viking King of England. And this is a terrible title in two ways. First of all, when the great heathen army, led by the sons of Ragnar, invaded England in the 860s, they conquered 3 of the English kingdoms, ruling 2 directly with a puppet in Mercia. Following that, there were a number of Norse kings in East Anglia and Northumbria. These are poorly documented, and in a couple of cases, we only know them from numismatic evidence, which is just a fancy way of saying we found some coins with their heads on them. The East Anglian Norse kingdom lasted to 918 and Northumbria to 954, otherwise known as the final act of Eric Bloodaxe, famously known as the most violent son of Harald Fairhair, first king of Norway. There are 18 attested Norse kings of England from this period, with several years in both kingdoms where we're just not sure who was king or if there was a king at all. And the second reason it's a terrible title is that Forkbeard was the straight-up formal king of Denmark and Norway, a wealthy and powerful realm in its own right at the time. He was the first person to smash a Bluetooth device in frustration. I'm referring, of course, to Harald Bluetooth, his father, who Forkbeard overthrew. So this was, in a way, just the conquest of one realm by another, proven more mighty on the fields of many battles. And this is my intro to a rewrite of this episode in 2022 of the original 2020 episode. If you want to let me know your opinion of this rewrite, send an email to hangingwithhistorypodcast@gmail.com. Episode 7 ended with a bit of a cliffhanger, saying it would be revealed that there was yet another way England was unique in Western Europe at the time. I mentioned right at the end that Forkbeard was paid 36,000 pounds of silver as a tribute in addition to the plunder he and his forces took, and that this was tax-funded. And that this was just the largest amount, up to that point, paid after a long sequence starting with Olav Tryggvason and continued by Forkbeard and Thorkell the Tall's Vikings. There were no other lands in Western Christendom capable of taxing their people this way. At the time, the Roman system of land taxation was just lost. Other places relied on indirect taxes on their relatively few market towns and the personal revenue of feudal domains, with their nobles and churches expected to cough up cash for special circumstances rather than ongoing regular taxation. Weber and Wodolski's History of Taxation and Expenditure in the Western World relates how the Frankish kings of Roman Gaul lost the old Roman administrative ability to tax land. The Romans had a cadaster or tax register of all villas with productive ability noted and the expected tax to be paid by each. We often think this is a Dark Age thing with the loss of literacy and above all numeracy leading to administrative failure. This was probably true, but it was helped by ideology. When the Franks converted to Christianity, they got the idea that tax collection was evil. And you could see why. Surely Caesar's taxation made Joseph and Mary's life more difficult. And there is a tradition that King Chilperic of Neustria, when 2 of his children were terribly sick at the same time, they viewed the sickness as punishment from God. The queen is supposed to have urged her husband to burn the wicked tax registers in the hopes that God would forgive the king and cure the children. Back in England, to put it in modern terminology, England had state capacity, established under pressure by Vikings that no one else, not even the Viking kings back home in their own kingdoms, possessed. The English established a special tax known as the Danegeld, a money tax, whereas previously most forms of taxation were paid in kind, loaves of bread, casks of ale, sheep and geese, that sort of thing. Administratively, England became very formidable by this process.
But you said several times that the French paid 7,000 pounds of silver to Ragnar.
Hello there, Quokka. You are the voice of Australia to me. Yeah, the nobles around Paris raised this sum, and nobles and churchmen all over France were paying off Vikings. They would raise these sums by asking for or forcing other nobles and churches to contribute. But they didn't have a regular national royal tax system on top of the local tax system to raise money. In this pre-conquest period, England could pay Vikings sums that would break treasuries of much larger countries. This kind of administrative power would not be seen again until the northern Italian city-states in the Renaissance, who pioneered so many modern financial innovations. In England, there were regular land taxes among other taxes. If you owned land, you had to pay. These taxes allowed the royal administration to exist, to pay huge sums of tribute, to defend the country when the royal administration was not totally corrupt, and to endure. I mean, the Saxon kingdom was amazing. Year after year, they paid sums that would empty the treasuries of other countries. They were defeated again and again, almost never winning battles in these later Viking times, starting in the late 10th century. And yet the government kept not falling. They failed and failed, but they didn't fall. Money was the key. As long as money was coming in, the government could continue to function until a serious conqueror came along. So from this period, there are a lot, and I mean a lot more Anglo-Saxon coins are found in Scandinavia than are found in modern England. It's a weird idea that if a late 10th century Anglo-Saxon coin is dug up tomorrow, your guess is that it should be found in Scandinavia.
Wow.
All right, so what does this mean? Did most of the portable wealth get moved out of England? Isn't that a silly idea? A lot did, but there were more circulating in England that just got melted down into later coinage, rather than be buried in a hoard the way it was done in Scandinavia. Can this be an important question for English history? Much of their coinage was removed to Scandinavia, but I mean, the sun shone, ripening the heads of the wheat. It rained, making the grass grow. The sheep cropped it. Coal and the ores in the ground were still there. The people still there. I think of the scene near the end of Princess Mononoke when Irontown is burned down to the ground, and the people survive by huddling together out in the lake. The Lady of Irontown tells everyone it doesn't matter. They're alive, and they can rebuild. It's a wonderful moment in a great film. I, of course, feel like the Iron Lady is a lot like Margaret Thatcher, and the scene is about England's post-70s rebirth. But Miyazaki is probably thinking of Japan's rebuilding from the ruin of World War II. It's great art because it points to something essentially human and broadly applicable. And digression. In the end, a precious metal is still just a piece of metal. Nowadays, we don't even need this common faith in precious metal. We put our trust in paper and electronic money.
That sounds scary. Everything depends on trust and money.
Yes, it does, but it works because social monkeys are like that and are really good at that.
But not always. Venezuela has huge inflation and starvation. Zimbabwe was printing billion-dollar bills.
Right, and there was Weimar Germany where you needed buckets of money to buy a bucket of turnips. But all through human history, we believed in precious metals, jewelry, and money. The examples you cited were where people tried hard socialism. It's not a money problem per se.
I've never heard the term hard socialism before.
That's where people in government can do whatever they want to the economy. They can actually act on any stupid idea or dumb aesthetic preference they have, and being human, we should totally predict the existence of stupid ideas and dumb aesthetic preferences. You end up with corruption, wide-scale poverty, hunger, empty stores, lines, hospitals without medicine, or even simple plastic tubing for transfusions. But on the plus side, people successfully diet. There are endless controversies over how diets work, but hard socialism has never failed at the weight loss challenge.
But why does hard socialism fail that way?
The monkeys need to cooperate to get anything done. Socialism allows a few people to interfere in the process of social monkeys self-organizing their activities to achieve their many varied goals. As bad as social monkey self-organizing activities are sometimes, interference is most likely, not always, worse. This interference is sometimes well-intentioned, think Sweden in the 60s or 70s, mainly merely driven by social desirability bias, and sometimes intended for self-enrichment in pretty evil ways, think Venezuela today. Either way, you get poor results compared to just letting the monkeys loose to do what monkeys do best. This is the verdict of history. I mean, if we ever get a real AI, it might be different.
But I thought Sweden had socialism and did well.
Had. Oh, they gave up their hard socialism when they realized they were falling behind and getting poorer than their neighbors. They were able to pivot to a more personal responsibility-based system with more economic freedom very quickly by the early 90s, and very admirably. You should look up September 3rd, 1967, if you ever doubt Sweden's ability in the field of social coordination.
But people always say Scandinavia is socialist today.
Yeah, people say that, but socialist, in quotes, is just a word that means different things to different people. By most measures of economic freedom, Scandinavia is a bit freer, more capitalist than the US and Australia today, more billionaires per capita, for example. Socialism is just a word. To some, it signifies a compassionate society that takes care of the weakest people, and Scandinavia does that part well today. Some call this version a Christian heresy, atheist sometimes, but basically an application of Christianity. Others will point out that socialism has a body count higher than the Black Death and the Mongol horde combined. This is an example of people using the same word for different things. Words are not like terms in an equation. You can use the word socialist if you want, but the equation Soviet Russia equals Sweden is simply untrue. In episode 7, we talked about exponential growth, and this brings to mind another idea from geometry, skew lines.
But skew lines are non-parallel lines that never intersect.
These different ideas of what socialism is are like that. They may use the same word, but in concept space, they're skew lines. An ideal is one thing. The historical outcomes of an ideal in action are different. Neither is at all convincing to someone who focuses on the other. And Scandinavian countries aren't like a monolithic block where they do everything the same. Denmark, for example, makes it super easy to fire people from their jobs, which encourages small business to hire a lot. Sweden, by contrast, makes it hard to fire someone and suffers from employers being reluctant to hire. Norway's kind of in between. And like I said before, they're able to pivot rapidly, far more so than we're used to in the Anglophone world. A couple years from now, all these relationships might be changed. If you forgive a little more discretion, while the taxes are brutal at around $35,000 a year, which seems like not much, the tax burden crosses 50%. They mostly go for the provision of public goods, mostly with the conscious support of the population. They are great places to visit and among the most prosperous countries in the world. There's a funny set of facts, though. People of Danish descent living in the U.S. make about 50% more than Danes living in Denmark, even after taking differences in government spending into account. Americans would be surprised to know that a super high proportion of employed Swedes, like about half, are on private medical insurance instead of inside the socialized medical system many Americans dream of having. And it's also the case that Americans of Swedish descent make 50% more than Swedes born in Sweden, just like Danes, and see similar levels and other measures of social well-being. Maybe just being a Scandinavian is a good thing in the modern world economy, whether you live there or, like me, in some other country. Let's get back to the topic you suggested originally in the early days of the podcast. Why was Britain special? Special, another technical term. Very early on, there's a state that develops the ability to regularly tax and fund public purposes, or maybe better to say it regenerates a barely remembered Roman practice in a way no other state at the time was capable of. So let's summarize what we have through episode 8. We have an island with Celtic, Norse, English, and Saxon communities living side by side in varying stages of integration and cooperation, and becoming something new, converging on the same religion that sees itself as special and distinct and, more important, better. I mean, there's still slavery and all of the forms of human evil, but you can argue that a psychological component of seeing yourself as more favored by God leads to being more open to reform with the face of Christ as judge. Paul Johnson has argued this. Furthermore, we're seeing an orientation towards law, deeper than in other places, arguably, with the beginning of a jury system where local affairs are, at least in places, being run by popular assemblies. None of these things are really unique in Western Europe at the time, but the combination of all in one place is. And we don't want to make too much of this for now, because a lot still has to happen, and some big changes are coming. 1066 is looming.
We started talking about money.
Money was a big attraction to Forkbeard, which was supposed to be what this episode's about. Possibly he had the responsibility to respond to the St. Brice's Day massacre, or this could just be a moment where everyone believes Ethelred and his poor advisors have to go. But it is hard to ignore the money. So the Vikings came back after a 2-year absence. Picking up in 10,009, Thorkell the Tall comes back before Forkbeard. The Saxons seem a lot more prepared. They'd built a 100-ship fleet, their armies were organized, and fortifications maintained. Great Saxon leaders like Edric Striona were ready to resist. So, what could Thorkell the Tall and his Jomsvikings do against such a large and well-prepared force? Well, tear them up like tissue paper pretty much describes it. It was no problem. When I mentioned Edric Striona, that was to tip you off about what's coming. He was maybe the reason, maybe just a symptom, of why the Saxons seemed unable to resist the Vikings effectively in this time period. He was Ethelred's son-in-law and a guy who murdered a lot of Saxon ealdormen. He was known for constantly withdrawing his troops from battle at the absolutely worst time, letting the Vikings win. So he was a betrayer as well as a murderer many times over, and he got his nickname Striona, which means the greedy, because of his other bad habit of seizing and selling church lands whenever he was short of ready cash. He seems like a man totally without scruples, but the Saxons depended on him. He was alderman of Mercia, and so he led much of the army. He betrayed or otherwise failed consistently. And he doesn't seem uniquely terrible in the Saxon leadership of the time, sorry to say. It seems the Vikings were willing to fight and the Saxons were just not, with leadership incompetent, corrupt, and rivalrous to a degree it's hard to understand and accept. The British History Podcast does a great job of laying this out, as I've mentioned before, so I won't go into any more details. I'll just say that when people in politics take their rivalries with each other too seriously and care more about accumulating treasure than governing well and honestly, well, that it might be hard to motivate the men you expect to fight and die for you. The invasion force led by Thorkell the Tall was not like the great army led by the sons of Ragnar. Remember them? Those guys were really part-time soldiers looking for land. They were farmers' sons, fishermen's sons from an overpopulated country, and they just wanted some land to call their own. It's interesting to wonder why the great heathen army was so successful. Lots of ink's been spilt over the question, but I tend to come down on the side that the Vikings were just better man for man. And I mean they were for a cultural reason. About 2/3 of the people were free, and these made up the fighters. They were fighting for themselves. On the Saxon side, most of the people were seriously oppressed farm labor, and of those with the incentive to defend their king, many were probably too disgusted to do so with enthusiasm at this time. You can see them fighting far better under Alfred and his sister. This army under Thorkell, and later when Forkbeard returned, was more professional. We make a great error if we think of the Vikings as backward barbarians. Perhaps they were in some ways. Common humanity always includes barbarism, right? But remember that Denmark had achievements like Hedeby, a pure market town without a hinterland. Think of a place like Hong Kong or Singapore. The logistical setup for Hedeby was very advanced for the time. They also had the Dannevirke, a wall going across the Jutland Peninsula that was a 100-year-long project involving long-term planning and collective action. And they had the 4 huge internal fortresses built during this time, of which Trelleborg is the famous one. They had advanced logistics, probably leading command and control. They were superior at sea and at stand-up fighting on their feet. They were also better at personal hygiene. Better personal hygiene might be a super weapon at the time. I mean, it really could explain a lot. The withering of armies, the attrition suffered by desertion and disease is just less of an issue for motivated men who frequently wash. But we can't say that Forkbeard commanded a Danish national army. These were all volunteers, and many were Norwegians, some were Swedes, by evidence of runestones. The distinctions are not really relevant, as I've been trying to show you by mixing references. With the gelds paid to Tryggvason, Forkbeard, and even more paid to Thorkell, this round of conquest was paid for by the conquered, much like the earlier round by the sons of Ragnar was. But not nearly as much of it was recycled back into the English economy as in the first round. So Thorkell lands 1009, quickly conquered East Anglia, and with him was a physically powerful young Norwegian named Olav Haraldsson, who would later be Saint Olav. In English that reads like Olaf Haraldsson, and Haraldsson literally means son of Harald, who would later become Saint Olav, patron saint of Norway, supposedly converted by the Archbishop of Canterbury, of whom I'll say more. They slaughtered much of the local nobility at the Battle of Ringmere in 1010, where Ulfkell Snilling is back, fiercely resisting, but everyone else runs away to save their skins. Otherwise, none of the Saxon leaders were willing to stand against them on the field of battle and risk their lives. By 1012, the Vikings were offered 48,000 additional pounds of silver to go home. There was one significant incident, maybe just a story at this time. Thorkell had captured Canterbury and the Archbishop too, along with everything else. Well, London did resist the Vikings, and they turned away for easier pickings. London had strong walls. The Vikings demanded a separate ransom for the Archbishop, but the Archbishop refused to allow anyone to ransom him. Thorkell, because he tried to get the Vikings to let the holy man free, even offering to pay the ransom out of his own pocket, the Jomsvikings refused Thorkell playing their own game, an interesting limitation the men placed on Thorkell's leadership. They pelted the Archbishop with bones and cattle skulls, and some think it was Thorkell himself who mercy killed the Archbishop in the end to stop the torment. And it was possibly this incident, disillusionment, that led Thorkell to switch sides at this point. He commanded 55 ships, he was certainly paid, to go act as Athelred's man. And Thorkell's departure may have been the reason Forkbeard came back. He came back with his own huge fleet, and he sailed up the Trent to Gainsborough, in the heart of Danish England, and there Uhtred and the Northumbrians submitted to him as king, as did Lindsey and the Five Boroughs. Then, after receiving the submission of the North, he crossed into Mercia, and there he led his men off the leash to Viking. Oxford and Winchester submitted. London, which was strengthened by Thorkell's ships, resisted again, and Forkbeard thought it better to go receive the submission of the West Country than to batter himself against London's walls. But pretty soon, London was the last holdout. Wisely, they too submitted to Forkbeard. The Saxon king Ethelred, with only Thorkell still supporting him, sailed off for Normandy, where his wife's Norman family had earlier taken in his children. So Forkbeard had arrived in July, only 5 months later, was master of all England. England is a conquered land, Forkbeard the conqueror, and 5 weeks later he died, Forkbeard the dead. And with that, we'll be back next week after Conversations with Cami.
Okay, we'll figure it out.
Okay, Cami, you've had a chance to listen to episode 8, The Greatness of Forkbeard. Sorry he ended up dead at the end, but we can't have everything.
No, everyone comes to an end at some point, I guess. It's one of the things we can count on in life. Forkbeard's an interesting guy, and I've enjoyed hearing about him.
Is it because the Roomba is named Forkbeard?
I was not sure if I should bring that up. During lockdown, we bought a Roomba, and Harold named him Forkbeard. The reminder of why we see so many coins when we visit different museums. That's how we learn of the names of the kings that we didn't know before. I hadn't considered that part of it. But the question I had for you, you made a comment about letting the social monkeys do what they do best. So I gotta know, what do you think? as social monkeys do best?
And it kind of depends on whether I worry about the word best in there, or just, what are social monkeys really good at? I mean, people can optimize over a really wide range of things at the same time, something that any kind of simple model will never capture with very good fidelity. From job that you do to where you work to how hard and why are really complicated kinds of questions. And there's there's optimizing over a huge number of variables, most of which are sort of unstated and never talked about. When that intersects, the world of work basically is the economy, and what people do all the time is what creates the value and gives us our materially pleasant life that we lead today.
Okay. Our social monkeys are behaving much differently right now, which is probably why that statement jumped out at me.
Are you talking about people outside during the pandemic, or?
Yeah. The new rules and the...
Well, it's like we went on that walk today. People were really polite and waited every time there was like a tight space where you couldn't pass two people in different directions without coming close to each other. There didn't need to be a sign, or there didn't need anybody directing traffic. People just sort of self-organized it. No? What was it?
I don't know. Okay. That does not need to be recorded. The social monkeys are all being forced to behave differently. We're used to going out and doing that economic thing. Mm-hmm. One of those things that you say we do best, especially of those of us who have certain skill sets that help keep things going. And now we're home and interacting with our families and not interacting with our families sometimes in the same ways.
Right.
And so that's what I'm meaning about the behaviors. And then there's the people fighting it all, fighting over things. But we've always fought over things. I mean, we talk about that all the time here.
Yeah, I see that in the media. I don't see it in real life, but...
Yeah, but I guess I'm talking about the sudden change of behavior of these social monkeys.
And that's
it was an
too.
overnight thing for most of us.
Yeah, anthropologically, some people are supposed to be more flexible than others and able to change more easily. I don't know how that cashes out in real-world behavior in 2020. I do think of that.
Perhaps what's left to be seen is, how do these social monkeys find a new normal?
Yeah. COVID world. I don't want to talk about it. Thanks, Cami, for coming on the show.
Please click subscribe or follow on your podcast app. If you like the podcast, please tell a friend about it. If you don't, please tell an enemy. Thank you for listening. If you'd like to discuss anything covered in the episode, please feel free to email me at hangingwithhistorypodcast@gmail.com.